A father looks through a jolly screen of white marble, listening as drums announce a new ruler inside the fort at Agra in 1658. Outside, the Yamuna glitters. Inside, power changes hands without a single line of mercy. Shah Jahan, builder of the Taj Mahal, is now a prisoner in his own palace. Aurangzeb, his son, has won the succession war and claims the throne of Hindustan. The scene captures the Mughal puzzle, an empire that ruled by steel and ceremony, by prayer and compromise, by monuments that still command the skyline. But the Mughals did not begin in marble halls. They began with dust and cannon smoke. In 1526, a Timurid prince named Babur crossed into North India from Kabul, bringing a Central Asian war style, a Persianate court language, and the ambition to be more than a raider. Over the next 3 centuries, his descendants would weld together Afghan cavalry, Rajput allies, Persian artists, and Indian revenue lands into one of the world's richest imperial systems. Culture was not decoration, it was a weapon. Court ritual taught elites where they belonged, who could approach, who could speak, who had to bow and offer a nazar of gold or flowers. Gardens and paintings staged the ruler as the axis of order. Even clothing, titles, and gift-giving turned politics into theater. Religion, too, was never a side story. The dynasty carried Islam as a marker of identity, yet most subjects were Hindu. Some rulers sought broad inclusion, others tightened boundaries. Sufi shrines offered bridges across communities, while temple patronage, mosque building, and public festivals signaled who enjoyed favor. Every choice had consequences. Alliances formed, rebellions ignited, legitimacy rose or cracked. Our trail will move from Panipat's battlefield to Fatehpur Sikri's courtyards, from Lahore's gardens to the Deccan plateau, and finally to Delhi in 1857, when the last Mughal was sent away and a memory war began. Along the way, we will watch how culture and belief could unify a continent, and how the same tools could later sharpen divisions. If you enjoy calm, story-driven history, subscribe and join me for the full journey. Evidence for this drama survives in court chronicles like the Shah Jahan Nama, imperial inscriptions carved in stone, coins bearing royal titles, and eyewitness visitors such as Francois Bernier. To understand how a dynasty could rise from exile and cavalry raids to imperial splendor, we have to step back into the fractured India Babur found waiting. In Delhi around 1520, the palace gates still bore scars of earlier storms, and every governor watched his neighbor as closely as the throne. North India looked powerful on maps, but it could be seized by anyone who moved faster than the court could react. For 2 centuries, the Delhi Sultanate had ruled wide territories, leaving behind a durable toolkit. Persian as the language of high administration, cavalry armies tied to land grants, and a habit of building mosques, forts, and tombs that announced Muslim kingship in stone. Yet the Sultanate rarely held India like a single locked chest. Provinces broke away, returned, broke again. In the 15th century, Bengal, Gujarat, and Malwa grew into confident regional states. In the north, Jaunpur challenged Delhi. In Rajputana, warrior houses such as Muir defended hill forts and honor codes that made conquest costly. To the south, the Deccan was its own world of sultanates and shifting alliances, while Vijayanagara stood as a major Hindu power beyond the Mughal horizon. Delhi itself was shaken by memory. In 1398, Timur's invasion and massacre left the city traumatized, and later rulers struggled to restore authority without fully rebuilding trust. By the early 16th century, the Lodi dynasty, Afghan in origin, held the throne, but its grip depended on a coalition of Afghan chiefs, Turkic officers, and local landlords who could turn disloyal overnight. When Sultan Ibrahim Lodi pressed hard to centralize, some nobles looked for an outside claimant, not because they loved foreigners, but because they feared being crushed at home. Beyond the Khyber Pass, the world of Babur mattered. Central Asia had its own prestige hierarchy. Timur's descendants claimed a right to rule, even when they lacked territory. Kabul sat on trade routes linking India to Persia and the wider Islamic world. From there, raiders could strike into Punjab, but a patient ruler could also imagine something larger, an Indian base that might replace lost Samarkand. This is why North India was contestable in 1526. It was rich, but politically fractured, connected to broader Eurasian currents, and filled with ambitious men who could invite conquest as a bargaining chip. We can trace these tensions in Persian chronicles like Ziauddin Bahrani's Histories of the Sultanate, later compilations such as Farishta, regional inscriptions, and coin legends that advertised who claimed sovereignty in each decade. When Babur hears that Delhi's nobles are divided and Punjab is open, he does not see a raid. He sees a doorway. On the plain of Panipat, April 21st, 1526, Babur orders his carts chained into a barrier and tells his gunners to hold their fire until the enemy closes. The air trembles, not with war cries first, but with cannon. Ibrahim Lodi comes forward with a larger army, confident in numbers and elephants. Babur's force is smaller, hardened by Central Asian campaigning, and trained to coordinate cavalry with gunpowder weapons that North Indian armies had not faced in this particular pattern. Babur anchors his line behind the cart barricade, using matchlocks and artillery to break the charge, then sends mounted wings to strike the flanks. When the Lodi formation collapses, the Sultan is killed, and Delhi and Agra fall into Babur's hands. Victory is only the start of legitimacy. Babur is a Muslim ruler in a land of many faiths, and a newcomer among entrenched elites. He frames his conquest as both Timurid inheritance and rightful kingship. He seeks public recognition through Friday prayers and minted titles, and he rewards allies in Punjab while trying to prevent rivals from rallying. The danger arrives quickly. In 1527 at Kanwa, a Rajput-led coalition under Rana Sangha challenges him near Agra. Babur answers with the same mixture of tactics and message, cavalry discipline, gunpowder, and a vow to stand firm. The battle is brutal, the coalition breaks, and Babur holds the heartland. Yet Babur also tries to make North India feel like a courtly home. He lays out gardens along the Yamuna, importing a Central Asian taste for ordered water channels and shaded walks. He gathers poets and scholars, using Persianate manners, recitation, gift exchange, and ranked seating, to bind followers into an imperial household. This is how culture begins to serve power, not as entertainment, but as a shared language for loyalty. Even then, Babur worries about climate, food, and the unfamiliar social world of Hindustan, and his complaints reveal how new this empire still is. When Babur dies in 1530, he leaves a throne but not a settled order. His son Humayun inherits rival brothers, ambitious Afghan chiefs, and a frontier that can swallow armies. Sources disagree on the precise numbers at Panipat, but the outline is clear in Babur's own memoir, the Baburnama. Later Mughal historians preserve battlefield traditions, while coins and early mosque inscriptions show Babur's royal style taking root. Gulbadan Begum's later Humayunnama hints at the family tensions beneath the triumph. The next chapter is not a smooth coronation, but a test of whether a conquest can survive its first succession. In 1540, Humayun rides out toward Kannauj with banners raised, yet his men whisper that the ground beneath the empire has turned to sand. Within weeks, he will be a king without a kingdom, fleeing west with only a handful of loyal riders. Humayun inherited Babur's victories, but not Babur's authority. He faced Afghan commanders who had served the Lodis and never accepted a Timurid newcomer, and he fought his own half-brothers, each eager for a province and a crown. Humayun tried to hold Delhi, Agra, and the Gangetic Plain at once, while also pushing into Gujarat and Bengal. The overreach opened space for a formidable rival, Sher Khan Sur, an Afghan leader in Bihar who mastered both war and coalition building. At Chausa in 1539, near the Ganges, Sher Khan, now styling himself Sher Shah Suri, caught Humayun at a vulnerable moment. Humayun escaped barely, some accounts say by clinging to an inflated waterskin. In 1540 at Kannauj, also called Bilgram, the Mughal army broke again. Sher Shah took Delhi and Agra, and the Sur dynasty ruled North India for 15 years. Sher Shah moved quickly. He rebuilt roads like the Grand Trunk Route, strengthened forts such as Rohtas, and stamped his authority through a disciplined military presence. The Mughal court, meanwhile, became a caravan of exiles. Humayun's refuge in Persia changed Mughal culture forever. In 1544-45, he sought help from the Safavid Shah Tahmasp. In return for support, he accepted Persian court ceremony and, according to many accounts, a public show of Sharia allegiance, an awkward performance for a Sunni Timurid prince. Persian artists, calligraphers, and learned men followed him back toward Kabul, bringing new colors, new tastes, and a sharper Persianate polish. From Kabul, Humayun rebuilt strength, and in 1555 he returned to India, retaking Lahore and then Delhi as the Sur regime splintered. The comeback was short-lived. In January 1556, Humayun fell down the steps of his library pavilion in Delhi, the Shir Mundal, and died, leaving his teenage son Akbar to face enemies on every horizon. The regent Bairam Khan rushed the boy toward Punjab because a new challenger, Hemu, was marching on Delhi. We hear this turbulent story through Gulbadan Begum's Humayunnama, the Afghan chronicle Tariq-i-Shir Shahi by Abbas Khan Sarwani, surviving Sur and Mughal coins, and later court histories that preserve eyewitness memories. Akbar will inherit not just a throne, but a lesson. Empires can be lost and reclaimed by those who learn to turn crisis into a new kind of legitimacy. In November 1556, a 16-year-old rides toward Panipat while veterans argue over who truly commands the army. Akbar listens, then lets steel settle the question. Hemu, a Hindu commander serving the Sur remnants, had seized Delhi and declared himself ruler, and the Mughal position looked as brittle as it had in Humayun's last days. At the Second Battle of Panipat, Mughal cavalry and archers pressed hard. Hemu was wounded. Many accounts say an arrow struck his eye and captured. His defeat reopened the road to Delhi, and Akbar's court could breathe again, though the violence of the aftermath also stained the victory. Akbar then did something harder than winning a battle. He built a durable coalition. In the 1560s and 1570s, he expanded into Malwa, Gujarat, and Bengal, securing ports and river routes that fed the imperial treasury and supplied armies. Yet conquest alone could not hold Rajasthan's fortresses or the loyalties of local elites. Akbar turned to alliance by marriage and honor. He accepted Rajput princes into his service, kept their faith, and rewarded them with command. The House of Amber became a pillar of the regime. Men like Raja Man Singh would later lead armies for the empire, while Akbar's household included Rajput queens whose families gained status without surrendering identity. Not every Rajput state joined peacefully. The Siege of Chittor in 1568 became a symbol of uncompromising resistance and Mughal determination. After the fort fell, chronicles describe mass death and forced submission. Muir's memory preserved the trauma in its own narratives. Akbar's message was clear. Partnership could bring honor, but defiance could bring annihilation. He used similar pressure at Ranthambore and other strongholds, then folded surrendered nobles into the imperial circle, making yesterday's enemy tomorrow's commander. As his authority grew, Akbar crafted a new imperial style. He held public audiences, rewarded loyalty in full view, and turned the court into a ladder of rank and favor that bound ambitious men to him personally. By the time he began building Fatehpur Sikri near Agra, the empire had moved from a conquest camp to a governing monarchy. We see Akbar shaping this world in Abu al-Fazl's Akbarnama, in the Ain-i-Akbari's descriptions of court life, in fortress inscriptions and victory monuments, and in Rajput bardic traditions that remember both alliance and loss. With the empire stabilized by force and friendship, Akbar now faces the deeper challenge: how to rule a religiously diverse realm without tearing his coalition apart. At Fatehpur Sikri in the late 1570s, lamps burn late in a hall where men argue about the nature of God while guards stand at the doors. For an emperor who has won with swords and marriages, the next battle is over meaning. Akbar understood that religion could split his coalition as surely as any rival prince. Early in his reign, he signaled inclusion with concrete acts. He removed the pilgrimage tax on Hindus in 1563 and abolished the jizya in 1564, steps that reduced a visible marker of hierarchy. He continued mosque building and supported Islamic scholars, yet he also gave grants to Hindu temples and to Sufi shrines. The Chishti order mattered especially. Akbar visited Mu'in al-Din Chishti's shrine at Ajmer, and he sought blessings from the Saint Salim Chishti at Sikri when he longed for an heir. These pilgrimages were politics in motion, public, reverent, and widely discussed. Then Akbar widened the circle. In 1575, he founded the Ibadat Khana, the house of worship, inviting Sunni and Shi'a scholars, Sufis, Jain monks, Hindu pundits, and later Christian Jesuits from Portuguese Goa. The debates could be sharp, even insulting. Akbar watched, asked questions, and learned where religious authority was strongest and where it was compromised by faction. He also learned how useful a ruler could be as an umpire in a world of competing claims. Out of this came policy and controversy. Akbar promoted a principle often described as Sulh Kul, peace with all, and he issued orders that limited forced conversions and encouraged a more universal language of loyalty to the crown. In 1582, he experimented with a personal ethical fellowship sometimes called the Din-i-Ilahi. Sources disagree on how many joined and how deeply it functioned, but many contemporaries treated it as an alarming sign of imperial overreach into faith. Orthodox critics, such as the historian Badiuni, wrote with anger, while supporters framed Akbar as a ruler seeking harmony. What mattered on the ground was the signal. Akbar would not allow one clerical faction to own the state. By placing himself at the center of religious conversation, he aimed to prevent rebellion framed as holy duty, and to make space for Rajput allies and diverse subjects to see the empire as their own. We can follow these debates in Abu al-Fazl's court histories, in Badiuni's critical writings, in Jesuit reports like those of Montserrat and later missionaries, and in inscriptions at Fatehpur Sikri that blend political and devotional language. Once religion is turned into a language of rule, the court's artists, poets, and musicians begin to turn that language into an imperial style the whole subcontinent can recognize. In a workshop near the imperial court, a master painter grinds lapis into blue while an apprentice traces a battle scene the emperor once remembered. This is not private art. It is statecraft with pigment and paper. Akbar's reign turned the court into a cultural engine. From Humayun's Persian exile came trained artists, and Akbar expanded their circle to include Indian painters with their own visual traditions. The result was a new Mughal style, Persian elegance fused with Indian attention to faces, animals, and everyday detail. In the imperial Kitabkhana, teams worked on vast illustrated manuscripts. The Hamzanama, produced on an astonishing scale, celebrated heroic adventure. Later projects like the Akbarnama pictured the emperor in action, hunting, judging, besieging forts, so that authority could be seen as much as proclaimed. Translation mattered as much as illustration. Akbar sponsored Sanskrit works rendered into Persian, including a Persian Mahabharata often called the Raznama. Court scholars debated terminology, trying to make Hindu epics legible to Muslim nobles without flattening them into caricature. These books were gifts, teaching tools, and political statements. The empire claimed to understand the cultures it ruled. Music and language carried the same message. The musician Tansen became a court legend, linked to the Dhrupad tradition and to performances that impressed both nobles and visitors. Persian remained the court's prestige tongue, but Hindavi speech flowed through camps, markets, and military ranks. Over time, a more mixed idiom, what later generations called Urdu or Rekhta, gained literary power. The court did not erase local culture. It curated it, selecting what could be framed as imperial. Architecture made the program visible. Fatehpur Sikri rose in red sandstone. Courtyards for public audience, pavilions for private council, a mosque complex anchored by the Buland Darwaza. The geometry signaled order. The carved details hinted at an empire comfortable borrowing motifs across communities. When nobles walked these corridors, they learned the Mughal way of being powerful, measured, ornate, and unmistakably central. We can still touch this world through surviving manuscripts with artists' names and colophons, through palace inscriptions and carved dates at Sikri, through Abu al-Fazl's descriptions of courtly arts, and through later collections that preserved paintings as prized heirlooms. Akbar's cultural program creates a template, and the next emperor will inherit it like a stage, then decide how to perform upon it with his own tastes and anxieties. One morning in Agra, Jahangir steps onto a balcony and orders a golden chain of justice, hung where any subject can pull it. He wants the empire to feel his presence as fairness and as spectacle. When Akbar died in 1605, the transition was not effortless. Jahangir, born Salim, faced an early crisis when his son Khusro rebelled. The revolt failed, and punishment followed. Sources differ on the degree of Khusro's blinding and confinement, but the message was unmistakable. The dynasty would not tolerate a rival prince gathering followers. In the same tense year, the Sikh Guru Arjan was arrested and died in Mughal custody. Mughal accounts and Sikh tradition interpret the episode differently, yet it became a turning point in Sikh memory and later resistance. Jahangir then leaned into a different kind of authority. He loved gardens, especially in Kashmir, and he used landscape to project rule. Terraced lawns, flowing water, and pavilions where the emperor could be seen receiving nobles with mountains behind him. His court painters reached new heights of precision. Jahangir demanded portraits that captured personality and rank, and he commissioned images of animals, birds, and rare curiosities that advertised a ruler with a naturalist's eye. Refinement became a claim to legitimacy. The empire was not merely strong, it was discerning. Power still required hard choices, and Jahangir often delegated those to trusted figures. His marriage to Nur Jahan brought a brilliant political partner whose family rose rapidly. Her name appears on some coins, and her patronage shaped court fashion and architecture. Meanwhile, the Deccan remained restless. Prince Khurram, later Shah Jahan, won victories there, gaining fame and also cultivating ambitions that would later threaten the throne. The wider world pressed in as well. Persian relations mattered on the northwest frontier, and European merchants sought privileges in Indian ports. In 1615, the English ambassador Sir Thomas Roe arrived at court, watching rituals of gift-giving and access that were carefully choreographed to keep foreigners impressed but subordinate. We can follow Jahangir's self-portrait in the Tuzukai Jahangiri, compare it with paintings that bear his orders in their margins, read Roe's detailed observations, and study garden inscriptions and surviving layouts from Lahore to Kashmir. As court culture becomes sharper and more luxurious under Jahangir, the question shifts from how to display power to how to concentrate it, especially when the next succession begins to brew inside the family itself. In Agra in the 1630s, masons set marble into place as if stitching light itself into stone, while the emperor watches in silence. A monument rises, and so does the cost of splendor. Shah Jahan took the throne in 1628 after years of maneuvering against rivals at Jahangir's court. He presented himself as the perfect Timurid monarch, controlled, orthodox in public Islam, and devoted to order. His reign became the classic image of Mughal grandeur. In 1632, after the death of his wife Mumtaz Mahal, he began the Taj Mahal on Agra's riverfront, a mausoleum of white marble, calligraphy, and precise symmetry completed over decades. The building was also a political statement. The dynasty could command talent, materials, and time on a scale that made subjects and foreigners alike feel small. Architecture multiplied the message. Shah Jahan rebuilt Agra fort's palaces and then founded a new capital, Shah Jahanabad, in Delhi. By 1648, the Red Fort's great halls framed imperial audiences, and the Jama Masjid, completed in the 1650s, anchored the city's sacred skyline. Court ceremony intensified, tiers of access, jeweled regalia, and the famed peacock throne, described by visitors as a concentrated burst of wealth and craft. Power was performed as perfection. Yet beneath the marble, strain accumulated. The empire fought on multiple fronts. Campaigns in the Deccan pushed against Ahmadnagar and pressured Bijapur and Golconda, while in the northwest the struggle over Kandahar against the Safavids drained men and prestige when the city was lost in 1649. In some regions, severe famine and disease in the 1630s tested the court's ability to respond, and the memory of suffering lingered even in years of victory. Most dangerous of all was succession. Shah Jahan had 4 prominent sons, each with armies, allies, and ambitions. Dara Shirkoh, favored at court, cultivated scholars and mystics. Aurangzeb built a reputation as a disciplined commander. Shah Shuja and Murad also waited, watching. When Shah Jahan fell ill in 1657, rumors ran faster than messengers. Princes raised banners, marched, and fought. Within months, the empire's polished surface cracked in a civil war, and the outcome would reshape Mughal religion and politics for generations. We know this reign through the official chronicle Padshanama, through inscriptions and dated Quranic calligraphy on the Taj and Delhi's mosques, through coins that proclaim Shah Jahan's titles, and through European travelers like Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, who described the court's riches. When the War of Brothers ends, the new ruler will inherit an empire at its peak and choose whether to hold it together by widening inclusion or by sharpening boundaries. In 1659, Dara Shikoh is brought in chains toward Delhi, and crowds strain to see the defeated prince who once stood closest to the throne. Aurangzeb knows that a civil war ends only when its symbols are erased. After taking power in 1658, Aurangzeb ruled as Alamgir, conqueror of the world, and he made decisions that still define Mughal debates. He placed Shah Jahan under confinement in Agra fort and eliminated rivals. Dara was executed in 1659, Murad was removed, and Shah Shuja fled and vanished in the east. The new emperor claimed to restore discipline after what he framed as courtly excess. He lived more austerely than Shah Jahan, yet he commanded the same imperial machine and pushed it harder. The Deccan became Aurangzeb's obsession. Earlier emperors had fought there, but Aurangzeb moved south for decades, leading campaigns that stretched supply lines and exhausted commanders. He annexed Bijapur in 1686 and Golconda in 1687, expanding Mughal rule over the plateau and its wealthy cities. But conquest did not bring peace. The Marathas, first under Shivaji and then under successors after Shivaji's death in 1680, fought a mobile war from forts and hill country. Aurangzeb captured strongholds, negotiated, punished, and returned, only to see resistance flare again. The execution of Sambhaji in 1689 did not end the conflict, it hardened it. Religion became another pressure point. Aurangzeb presented himself as a more overtly Islamic ruler, sponsoring the compilation of legal opinions later known as the Fatwa-e-Alamgir. In 1679, he reimposed the jizya, a tax with symbolic weight that many contemporaries read as a shift away from Akbar's inclusion. He issued orders that curtailed some public celebrations, and his reign saw notable instances of temple demolition or conversion, though historians argue about scale, motives, and local context, and records also show grants and protections to certain Hindu institutions continuing in places where alliance required it. These choices reshaped legitimacy. Some Muslim scholars praised Aurangzeb's piety. Many Hindu elites remained in imperial service, yet distrust grew, and opponents learned to frame resistance in religious terms. The empire became larger on paper and more fragile on the ground. We trace this era through chronicles like the Alamgirnama and Maisar Alamgir, through surviving imperial orders and mosque inscriptions, and through rival memories preserved in Maratha Bakars and Sikh tradition. As Aurangzeb's wars grind on into old age, the empire's enemies learn a dangerous lesson. Mughal power can be resisted, survived, and slowly bled. By the 1690s, Aurangzeb's camp in the Deccan feels like a moving city of tents, horses, and weary men, always packing, always marching. The emperor can still take forts, but time itself has become his opponent. The long Southern War produced a chain reaction across the empire. In the Deccan, Mughal armies chased Maratha bands that avoided set battles, striking supply routes and forcing costly sieges. Each fort taken demanded garrisons. Each garrison demanded pay and provisions. Each delay encouraged more local powers to test the limits. In the north, other communities watched and acted. The Jats around Mathura and Agra, tied to agriculture and local leadership, rose in repeated disturbances. Some episodes turned into open rebellion, exploiting the empire's distraction. In Punjab, tensions with Sikh communities deepened. After Guru Arjan's death in 1606, Sikh leadership had already moved toward armed defense under Guru Hargobind. Under Aurangzeb, confrontations intensified, and in 1699 Guru Gobind Singh created the Khalsa, a disciplined brotherhood with a clear identity and martial code. Mughal governors attempted suppression. Sikh bands responded with raids and mobility, a pattern that would expand after Aurangzeb's death. Rajput relations also fractured at key moments. When the powerful Rathore ruler Jaswant Singh of Mervar died in 1678, succession disputes and Mughal intervention helped trigger a Rajput rebellion that drew resources north again. Even where Mughal authority ultimately reasserted itself, the trust that Akbar had cultivated was weakened. Local elites began to calculate that the empire could not punish everyone at once. This was the great shift. Mughal power remained formidable, but its monopoly on force and legitimacy thinned. Provincial commanders, landholders, and religious leaders learned to bargain harder. Some still wanted Mughal titles and recognition because the imperial brand carried prestige. Others aimed for practical autonomy, ruling in the emperor's name while keeping real control at home. We glimpse this changing balance through Persian court and provincial chronicles, through Sikh narratives of the gurus and early Khalsa, through Maratha accounts that celebrate guerrilla success, and through European observers who noticed the empire's armies stretching farther with diminishing returns. When Aurangzeb dies in 1707, the question is no longer whether the Mughal Empire is powerful, but whether anyone can hold its pieces together without breaking what remains of its cultural and religious bargains. In 1707, Aurangzeb is buried at Kuldabad in the Deccan with a simplicity that contrasts sharply with the empire he leaves behind. Almost immediately, princes and generals begin to pull at the seams. Aurangzeb's son Bahadur Shah I secured the throne after another succession struggle, but his reign, 1707 to 1712, was spent firefighting, negotiating with Rajputs, confronting Sikh resistance, and managing nobles who had grown accustomed to acting independently. After him, the throne changed hands rapidly. Jahangir Shah lasted months. Farrukhsiyar rose with the help of powerful brokers known as the Sayyid brothers, who soon became kingmakers, elevating and removing emperors as politics demanded. In Delhi, the Red Fort still hosted ceremonies, but the aura of unquestioned command was fading. When Muhammad Shah began his long reign in 1719, the court sought pleasure and style even as threats multiplied. Meanwhile, new centers of power hardened into states. In the Deccan, Nizam-ul-Mulk asserted control and founded what became Hyderabad as a semi-independent realm. In Awadh, Saadat Ali Khan built a court that would later flourish in Lucknow. In Bengal, Murshid Suli Khan strengthened provincial authority and shifted wealth toward Murshidabad. These rulers often kept Mughal titles and used the emperor's name in formal proclamations, because the Mughal stamp still conferred legitimacy, but they acted with increasing freedom. Maratha power expanded into the north, extracting tribute and forcing local rulers to negotiate. Sikh bands reorganized in Punjab after repeated conflicts. The empire did not vanish. It fragmented, like a great tree whose branches continued to grow even after the trunk weakened. Yet culture did not die with central power. In Delhi, poets refined Urdu and Persian verse. Courtly etiquette persisted. Painters and musicians sought patrons among nobles who still craved Mughal polish. In regional capitals, Hyderabad, Lucknow, Jaipur, Mughal tastes were copied, adapted, and sometimes improved. The idea of Mughal civilization became portable, carried by craftsmen, scholars, and families moving to safer courts. We can follow this period through Persian histories written under later emperors, through coins that still name Mughal sovereigns even when struck far from Delhi, through court poetry collections, and through foreign travelers who remarked on the contrast between ceremonial splendor and political weakness. As the center struggles to command, an external shock is coming, an invasion that will expose how fragile the old imperial heart has become. On February 24, 1739, at Karnal north of Delhi, Mughal troops face a storm they do not yet understand. Nadir Shah's army moves with ruthless speed. By the time the dust settles, the road to Delhi lies open. The Mughal Emperor Muhammad Shah could still summon nobles and elephants, but the empire's fractured command made it slow to respond. Nadir Shah of Persia exploited that weakness. After the short, sharp defeat at Karnal, he entered Delhi and demanded submission and treasure. At first, the city tried to accommodate the conqueror, but a rumor of Persian death sparked violence in the streets. Nadir Shah replied with terror. Chroniclers describe a massacre and looting that stunned contemporaries. The peacock throne and immense wealth were carried away, and Delhi's sense of inviolability was shattered in a single season. After 1739, Mughal sovereignty became increasingly symbolic. Regional rulers, Hyderabad, Awadh, Bengal, acted as independent monarchs in practice. Maratha forces pushed into North India, sometimes presenting themselves as protectors, sometimes as extractors of tribute. In Punjab and beyond, a new Afghan power rose. Ahmad Shah Durrani, also known as Abdali, invaded repeatedly from the 1740s onward. His campaigns culminated in the Third Battle of Panipat in 1761, where Maratha armies suffered a catastrophic defeat. North India became a contested arena of Afghans, Marathas, Sikhs, and local chiefs, while the Mughal court in Delhi struggled to pay troops or control provinces. Into this instability stepped a different kind of empire. The English East India Company, originally a trading corporation, expanded its military role in Bengal. After Plassey in 1757 and Buxar in 1764, company armies defeated regional forces and then negotiated the right to collect Bengal's revenues in 1765 under the formal authority of the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II. Shah Alam himself spent years moving between camps, seeking protection from whichever power seemed least dangerous. The irony was sharp. The emperor's name still legitimized rule, but real power had shifted to men who spoke in contracts and canons. We can reconstruct these shocks from Persian and Mughal chronicles of Nadir Shah's invasion, from European eyewitness accounts in Delhi, from surviving coins and court proclamations, and from company correspondence that reveals how trade became territorial control. Delhi remains a capital of memory, but now it is surrounded by stronger powers, and the next generations will fight over whether the Mughal emperor is a ruler, a hostage, or a sacred symbol. In 1788, armed men burst into the Red Fort, and the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II is seized and blinded by the Rohilla leader Ghulam Qadir. The act is both cruelty and declaration. The throne can no longer protect even the man who sits upon it. Shah Alam's humiliation shocked North India. Maratha forces soon punished Ghulam Qadir and restored the emperor to Delhi, but restoration was not recovery. The court survived because everyone still needed its symbolism. Nobles wanted titles, regional rulers wanted recognition, even conquering armies wanted the city's aura. Delhi became a stage where power was displayed by others, while the emperor played the role of sacred centerpiece. In 1803, during the Second Anglo-Maratha War, British forces under General Gerard Lake took Delhi from the Marathas. The company did not abolish the Mughal throne, it enclosed it. Shah Alam II died in 1806 under British protection, and his successors Akbar II and later Bahadur Shah II reigned inside a tightening cage of treaties, residents, and guards. They held durbars, issued honors, and maintained the rhythms of court life, but their authority rarely extended beyond the city's walls. And yet, the cultural life of Delhi could still feel electric. Urdu poetry and performance flourished. Mir Taqi Mir had already given the city a voice of loss. In the 19th century, poets like Kalib and Zak wrote for patrons tied to the court, weaving everyday politics into ghazals that audiences could recite in candlelit gatherings. Craftsmen continued to make fine textiles, metalwork, and calligraphy, often for new buyers connected to the company. Mughal culture became both refuge and currency, a way to claim dignity when sovereignty was gone. Even the symbols were contested. The company increasingly placed its own marks on authority. By the 1830s, it pressed for new coinage and titles that reduced the emperor's public role, while still exploiting the prestige of his name when convenient. Delhi's people lived with two realities at once: imperial ritual in the Red Fort and foreign power in the streets outside. We can see this world in British diplomatic papers and memoirs, in surviving court paintings and dated inscriptions, and, most vividly, in the poetry collections and letters of Delhi's writers who recorded the city's mood. When a new crisis erupts in the 1850s, Delhi's symbolic emperor will suddenly become the banner for a rebellion he did not plan, and the final act will be written in exile. On May 11, 1857, rebels entered Delhi and head straight for the Red Fort, not to loot first, but to ask an old poet king for a crown. Bahadur Shah II, Zufar, hears the shouts and understands that symbols can be more dangerous than armies. The uprising had begun the day before in Meerut, when sepoys rebelled against their officers and marched toward the imperial city. Delhi's gates opened amid confusion, and British residents fled toward the ridge. In the chaos, the rebels proclaimed Zafar as emperor, because no other name carried the same historic weight. Zafar was in his 80s, with little real power and a court that lived on memory, but once his name was invoked, the revolt gained a center. For months, Delhi became the rebellion's most charged battlefield. From June to September 1857, British forces and loyal units laid siege, bombarding the city's walls and fighting street by street after the assault began on September 14th. When Delhi fell, vengeance followed. Zafar's sons and grandsons were hunted. Several princes were killed near the city gates. Zafar himself was captured at Humayun's tomb, tried by a military commission, and in 1858 sent into exile in Rangoon. He died there in 1862, buried far from the Yamuna and the sandstone halls where emperors once held audience. With that exile, the Mughal Empire ended as a living institution. Yet the fight over its meaning intensified. Colonial writers often portrayed the Mughals as decadent despots to justify British rule, while many Indian nationalists later reclaimed Mughal monuments as part of a shared heritage. In the 20th century, communal politics sometimes recast Mughal history as either golden tolerance or foreign oppression, squeezing a complex past into slogans. Modern historians have pushed back by returning to evidence: coins, inscriptions, court chronicles, and local records that show cooperation and conflict, patronage and violence, often in the same reign. If this series gave you a clearer view of Mughal India, please like the video and share it with someone who enjoys history. The clearest legacy is still physical. The Taj's riverfront glow at dawn, the Red Fort's massive gates, Fatehpur Sikri's silent courtyards, and the gardens of Lahore and Kashmir where emperors once walked. And there is a linguistic legacy too. Persianate court culture helping shape the growth of Urdu poetry, including Zafar's own verses, written as his world collapsed. We can trace 1857 through rebel proclamations, British siege reports and trial proceedings, Zafar's surviving poetry, and the inscriptions and monuments that outlasted every army. The empire fell, but the argument it started, about how culture, religion, and power should share a single land, still waits in India's stones for each new generation to answer.